Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I've faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of Pioneer Mindset. We are going to continue this three-part series that we're on. So we talked about the weight of the workload. We talked about keeping the business side of the farming operation from falling apart. Now, today, we're going to dive into this third part here. The one thing that most farmers won't admit is actually suffering until it's already broken. And that's the work and family life balance. All right, so at the beginning of the last week's episode, kind of talking about the business side of things, I mentioned this phrase that the farm will take every minute you have and every dollar you. And so that kind of bleeds right into today's episode. We're talking about don't let the farm win at the expense of literally everything else. Okay. And so with that, I just mentioned that the farm will take every minute you have. And so that's very true. And I think that's where we want to dive into this week's episode because as I mentioned, the series that we're on here, this was just some different thoughts that I was having as we were getting into the busy season. And as we're going to remain in that busy season as well by the time you actually hear this episode. And so one of the areas that was kind of stressing me out or is trying to really take a lot of my time and my mental capacity was just keeping this balance, making sure I'm still present for the kids, making sure I'm still around to help my wife with the kids and to continue our, have a good, healthy relationship with her as well. And so want to really just kind of dive into the realities of everything that we face as farmers, as husbands. Depends on what your perspective is, who you are listening to this. Maybe you're the wife, maybe you're the mother, and maybe you're the sibling. Whatever the case is, whatever your perspective is, it's going to be a little bit different for each person. Now, me, as the guy on this side of the mic recording this episode, my perspective is I'm the husband, right, to my wife, and we've got 4 kids together, 4 boys. And so I'm a father. I'm the business owner. I'm the entrepreneur. So I've got a lot of different hats that I wear, a lot of different seats that I fill. But that's my perspective. As I share everything that we're talking about today, that's my perspective. So it kind of depends on really who you are and if you can kind of fully relate to everything we're going to talk about. But even if you can't, maybe it'll shed some light on some things that those around you are actually maybe going through in their perspectives as well. As this comes out, we would really appreciate if others kind of share their perspective on this whole, kind of family work-life balance as we're going to be talking about and in the realities that they face and the perspectives that they see, and then kind of going from there. So we can all kind of learn, and it's helpful to see things from somebody else's perspective as well. I think it helps kind of improve the overall relationship. Okay. So the realities of this, this work-life balance, as we call it, and it's always this big mystery and of, how do we actually keep this a positive balance? How do we actually make sure that we can maintain some sort of balance here? And I feel like in the words balance, we've got this in our head that it has to be perfectly equal. Well, I think we both know that's a false reality. And so that's why a lot of people would maybe actually use the words alignment. Maybe it just has to be in alignment with the current season that you're in. And that's fine too. But I guess just to kind of dive into the realities here of the things that we face, as we get into the busy season, especially planting time, whatever season that you're currently in, as you listen to this, we're always going to have something going on. And so it's really easy for us as farmers, as husbands, to focus on the work side of things, especially if we love that work so much, especially if we're really passionate about what we do and just want to do the best job that we can. All right. And then especially in an industry like agriculture, where it may be seasonal, but it's also really highly dependent on, one, the physical labor, but then 2, just the seasonality of, taking advantage of the weather, right? We've talked about that in kind of the first one, the weight of the workload. Right? But taking advantage of the weather, doing the work that we can while we have the opportunities, right? And so what that brings some challenges to is it brings all these maybe just different fluctuations and uncertainties within, maybe we're gone here for this week or this month even, and then we're around more. And so there's just all these different fluctuations there. And I'm going to dive into that here in a second, but, really getting into the realities. And I think for me, when it comes to working, And it goes back to the workload, goes back to even just focusing on where we spend our time and focusing on even the business side versus the just the work that needs to be done, right? The operations, the day to day operations. But for me, what this comes down to is just the way that I grew up. I was taught, trained, conditioned to value my work ethic so much, and maybe not necessarily to my dad's fault, but almost to a negative, to where like I thought my worth, my net worth came from how much I actually worked and how much work I could get accomplished. And I always go back to the phrase that my dad said a lot, and it came from his dad, being of that generation that came up, maybe born of like the late 30s, and went through a lot of those hardships, maybe served in some sort of war and did a lot of just good physical hard effort work and right. And it came from this phrase, just kind of came from that generation, it seemed like. But they always said, if you work hard, you'll make a good living. And so at the end of the day, I feel like in the back of our minds, we are just trying to make a good living. We're trying to provide a good lifestyle for our kids, maybe even a better lifestyle for our kids than what we had. I'm just trying to create all these opportunities for them and for us, and just trying to do the best job that we can. And in our minds, in order to do that, we need to work and we need to bust our ass. We need to get after it. And so when the time comes for us to do that, by golly, we're going to get after it. We're going to try our best to take advantage of these different opportunities. Fast forwarding a little bit, getting into the fall, that was part of why I always really liked the fall because there's so much going on. I felt like there was actually so much opportunity for one to actually get ahead in the fall because all you got to do is just work hard and put the hours in, doing the right things, and you can really make yourself some stride right now, in the fall, right? And that's why in the fall, I always had that mindset. But back to what we're talking about here today's episode, when we have that mindset, it can be really hard to keep this balance between those around us, between our relationships, for me, my wife, and kids. It can be really hard to keep that balance and still spend some time with them, still be present with them because of all that work that needs to be done. And because of this mindset that we have, is if we just work hard, we'll make a good living. And we just want to make a good living. We just want to do our best. So going back to the work ethic was one thing that I valued more than a lot of other things. Literally, we went through a training one time, and I was in high school, so I was pretty young, pretty green, pretty naive, and didn't really think much about the training itself. But we were trying to put together like our core values, and I literally had work ethic up there right next to our faith. Faith, family, work ethic. We've always heard faith, family, farming. Those different things. Same thing with this. Talking about the work and all these things that we're trying to do. And so that's where when it comes to my perspective and we get into the busy season, we see this as a chance to finally put our hands to work and get after it and maybe make ourselves a little bit of money. And we feel better about ourselves when we're actually working. And side comment there, that's part of why I always never minded working on maybe a Sunday morning doing chores or maybe late in the evening or getting after it early in the morning when other people maybe aren't getting there yet. It's kind of like the early bird gets the worm phrase, right? We hear that, we take that to heart, and so we get after it. And so we're working as hard as we can. And furthermore, as we get into spring, this is also the time of year where we are seeing those around us doing work as well. Neighbors are getting after it, neighbors are getting in the field. And so we feel this peer pressure that, okay, they're working, we're not, we got to go. We are late. We are going to be behind, all because somebody else is working when we're not. And these are just literally the thoughts that come up for me and probably a lot of those of you that are listening to this as well. And even if these thoughts don't come up for you, maybe you're the one not experiencing these thoughts, but you're the one that is married to the one that has these thoughts. Okay. And so that's where I just want to bring up the realities of this and why we sometimes work as hard as we do, as much as we do. And sometimes it's just the way that we are taught, trained, and conditioned. It's just literally the worldview that we have on what we're trying to accomplish. Okay. And so that is one thing I want to highlight right off the bat as we get into this, because to some extent, you might look back from an outside perspective. And you're like, man, why is that guy working so much? He's just working himself to the bone, to the core, and just not paying much attention to his family. He's always gone, 24/7, just 365, right? Well, we got to ask ourselves, why is he doing that? Maybe there's a pretty good reason in his mind why he's doing it. Doesn't mean it's necessarily the best thing to do, but we can all justify everything within our own minds, right? And so we just sometimes it helps us give us that awareness if we can actually acknowledge where do those thoughts come from and why we actually have them. And then from that point on, maybe we can actually do something about it. Okay. All right. So to kind of keep moving here, one thing I also will mention when it comes to the work side of things, it can to some extent be used as an escape. Okay. For me, And I'm guilty of this as well. Maybe it's just to kind of be used as an escape. Hey, got field, got beans to go, gotta go plant. I got beans I gotta go spray. I gotta go plant the corn. I gotta go cut the hay. Gotta go do this, that, or the other thing. Farm will take every minute you have, right? And the farm, in a lot of cases, comes first. Okay, so when we got a good weather, we gotta go, and it's just this escape. It's almost like, well, sorry, I know the wife, I know the kids are crying at home, screaming, running like mad dogs, but I gotta go. Sorry, good luck. And that's so very common. But a lot of times we will, to some extent, use work as an escape because it is a pretty easy go to. It's almost like an easy out sort of thing. And so that's where I feel like it's so very common for us to use work as an escape. And there too, as I'm talking about this, the big thing, and just to kind of jump ahead a little bit, the number one step of things that we can do is just have the awareness. Okay. So as I'm talking about these different realities that we face that come up for me, that probably come up for you, it's just literally having the awareness that these thoughts come up. So, as we have the thought of, okay, it's 6 o'clock, I probably should sit down for supper, but hey, I'm going to go spray another load, or I'm going to go leave the wife and kids that are waving at the window. One's screaming, one's crying, one's half naked, and the other one's, you know, I don't know. You know what I mean? And so it's these thoughts that come up that it's pretty easy for us to use the farm and all the work that we need to do as an escape. And then furthermore, kind of on that same note, and even on the same note of your work is your worth, I feel like it's also one of the things that's really hard to stop too. Right. Once again, if you really truly love and enjoy what you're doing, it can be really hard to stop working. It can be really hard to stop doing what you need to do. And it's also partly because there's always so much to do. There's always something to do, right? There's always something that we need to do on the farm. If we're not doing something, there's something we're not doing. I always mess that up, but it's always something my dad says all the time. If we're not doing something, there's something we're not doing. So we take that to heart. We always got to be doing something. We always go on to the next thing. As soon as we get done with this, and that's a big task or milestone that we had on the to-do list, we go right down the list to the next thing. And it's hard for us to stop. It's hard for us to quit. And part of that is also because we get into the groove, we get into the momentum, we even have this adrenaline going on, right? So I always equate this back to maybe not so much now because, we do have 4 kids at home. And so it's a lot harder to say, sorry, I'm going to go work when there's 4 kids at home versus maybe back in the day when there was only 1 kid at home, right? So maybe not as much now, or even pre-kids, by the way. But I go back to some times that we have. It's usually in the spring, not so much anymore since we got rid of the cows. We got rid, we have the livestock. But there was at one point in time where what we would always do is always be kind of towards the end of the May. We would have a late field of it was rye that we were grazing. We would be grazing out there, maybe even chopping. Maybe we chopped some rye or maybe some first cutting alfalfa. So we'd do that. And then we would turn around and we'd go plant it. And then we would have to spray it and we'd have to, maybe pull the cows off, get the fence up, then plant it, all that other stuff. But there's always a week in there, usually in the spring, maybe even in the fall as well, where there's literally about 100 things that need to be done. And they're all time sensitive because of weather and trying to get this in as soon as, get the crop off, get the new crop in as soon as possible. And we get to where we're literally just working ourselves to the bone, up at the crack of dawn, getting in late, running late hours, maybe running till midnight, and all these things. We're just running. And even at the end of the week of doing that for maybe a week or even 2, and maybe even just a short term, even if it's just a week, you'd think you'd be dog tired to the bone, just ready just to collapse in a heap. But at the same time, you actually have a hard time stopping. You actually have a hard time slowing down. I remember a really good example because it was a Saturday afternoon. We'd gotten everything accomplished that we wanted to, but I had on the to-do list, I had a couple of these other things to do. And I'm like, all right, let's go. Literally just running off of adrenaline. Okay. Running off of just trying to do the next thing. And that those time frames, when you're accomplishing all that stuff, you're checking off so much stuff on your to-do list. Man, do you feel great? You're just like conquering the world. You're doing everything that you can. You're taking the challenges as they come. Man, do you feel great? Man, do you feel like you could just accomplish anything and you just want to keep moving? You just want to keep doing the next thing. You're just literally running off of adrenaline, pure blood pumping, just getting after it. But at the end of the day, what happens when you're doing that? Well, there's probably something that's suffering, right? Back to what we talked about at the beginning. We really lose sight that what might actually be suffering. And usually we don't notice it until it's probably already broken or the damage is done. And so back to that work, family, life balance. Now, like I said before, it's a lot harder for us to do this now, a lot harder for me to do this now when I do have four kids at home and there's a lot more going on, right? So that noise on that side of the balance side does get a lot louder and harder to ignore, which is not a bad thing, by the way, because that does cause me to slow down a little bit. But back to this before, like I said, it's hard for us to stop. It's hard for us to actually quit when the tasks are done that we had planned to do. And then the last thing, kind of on this same note, is that we get into saying, when it comes to with the wife and kids or those around us, maybe it's just your girlfriend, whatever. Well, okay, well, I'll do this when it slows down. We'll go shopping for furniture. We'll go to the garden store so we can get the plants for the garden, or we'll go do this, that, or the other thing that you've been wanting to do for the last month or two. When it slows down, we will do this later. That's such an easy thing to kind of throw out there, kind of give them a bone. This will satisfy them for a little bit, shut them up for a little bit so I can go back to the field and keep doing work and work and work. But that is such an evil trap because one, it's not realistic. Two, it's just something that we're not being honest with ourselves when we say that. And three, the work never truly actually stops. I just said it before. If we're not doing something, there's something we're not doing. And we will just go, go, go until there's literally nothing on our to-do list, or we will make up stuff on our to-do list just to keep moving. All right. And so that goes back to just this trap of we'll do it later. Well, later never actually comes. Okay. And I think we all know that if we've been around the block a few times, if we had a few seasons under our belt and we've been there, we've used that excuse and it's backfired on us a few times. Yeah, we get to that point where we understand that later never truly happens. So that's just kind of a matter of being honest with yourself and being honest with those around you. Okay. I really highlight all of that stuff. I highlight all that. It sounds like negative stuff too, by the way, and it can be. It can definitely have a negative outcome on this family work life balance. Definitely a lot of positives that can come from that as well when we knocking all this stuff out. From my perspective, my point of view, that's been in those shoes, man, we get a lot of stuff done and you feel really good after all those things get done. And yeah, you probably do crash at some point, but it's one of those crashes when you just feel like, my work is done. I'm worth something for all the work I put in, doing the best job that I can. But in this, the reason we're having this conversation is those things now, maybe in the season that we're in, can lead to some really hardships. They can lead to some negative outcomes with those around us. And so that's what we want to really kind of focus on, right? And now a couple other things here. Talk about the realities and some different things that we see or I've noticed and I've thought about here a lot here lately is a lot of times it's just the change that we have a really hard time with. This could be the change in anything, right? And right now we're talking specifically this balance here, but just change in anything. So the season that I'm currently in, being a father, we read a lot of books to our kids. And so I think of either quotes from books or phrases or even kids' movies. And right now, what comes to mind is this book that we read a lot to the kids. It's called Raising the Littlest Cow. It basically says change came as change does. And she had another little brother. And so the change was what really caused the hardship there. So anyways, with change, think about it this way. Just think about it even from a cash account balance. We've all got our checking accounts out there. Think from a cash account balance, whatever that looks like for you. Think if you had $10,000 in your checking account right now and you went down to $2,000. That's a pretty big change. How would you feel seeing your bank account go down that far? That change is what causes the hardships, right? That change is what causes us to maybe freak out, something that we're not used to. If it's always been at $10,000, then all of a sudden in the flip of a switch, it's down to $2,000, you'd probably be in a little bit of a panic mode. That would cause some negative thoughts or negative hardships, right? Okay, now on the flip side of that, all right, what happens if your bank account was always at $10,000 and now all of a sudden it went to $20,000? Yeah, there's a change there. Maybe some positive feelings, but all of a sudden we will also realize with positives, there can be negative mindsets and thoughts that come to mind. Now all of a sudden you go from 10,000 to 20,000, you're like, man, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to protect this as best as I can and make sure I don't throw it away? What am I going to do about this? And so there's that mindset that comes in as well. And same thing, another example here, kind of third example of maybe if you had $20,000 in your bank account and you had that in your bank account for a long time, you protected it, and now it goes back to 10,000. You're going to be panicking once again because it's that change, that decrease, that change from 20 to 10,000, right? And so even though 10,000 is where you started all along as we started this kind of a scenario here, there's that change that's causing this negativity, right? And so that's why I think change is one of those really hard things because it's a change in everything that we're doing, change from status quo, if you will. Okay. And so kind of funny little side story here. I remember listening to a podcast. I can't even remember which one it was, but they were talking. Well, actually, I do. I think it was Logan and Bobby Hanks off of Talk Dirt to Me. A good shout out to those guys. Go give them a listen. But I think they were talking to, they had a listener write in and it was like, hey, just got married. How do I, this, that, or the other thing? And basically they're like, well, as soon as you get married, even before you get married, always go hunting, literally all the time, every weekend. Because if you don't, and then all of a sudden you change and you want to start going hunting, well, that's going to be a problem. And I had to laugh because it sounds like crazy, foolish advice. And I'm not saying you should take that, by the way, but it's the fact of the change that gets us. All right. So, a personal kind of story here for us and for our relationship, for our family, we have never been one to work like Sundays. All right. It's kind of one of those things that really got instilled in us like, hey, Sundays are for rest or for day of going to church and just for taking off to being with family and not really working or doing anything on the farm or business related. And so we've done our best to hold that true. And so even when I started dating my wife, I always had Sundays, I was always around her, all the time. We got married, always around. But there were certain times here and there to where we did actually work a Sunday. Maybe I sprayed on a Sunday so I could, it was a good day and I knew I was going to be gone later in the week and I just had to take advantage of it. So there's been times where we do work a Sunday occasionally. But by golly, I can tell you that change is probably what's the hardest part. If I'd have been always a guy who worked Sundays, or maybe another good example to this is I'm actually a guy that I'm around a lot in the mornings to help get the kids out the door. And so I'm always there to help get the kids out the door and always have been, right? And so the change would be if all of a sudden I said, okay, for the next month, I'm going to be gone and you're going to have to do this on your own. That would be a pretty big change. If our relationship was always set up to where she always had to get the kids out the door and I was never around, it probably wouldn't be that big a deal. But it's always that change. That's what we have the hardest part with. And I think we can acknowledge that in all these different areas and facets of our life, but especially as we talk about this, your topic today, that family work-life balance, is how the change in what we're doing. So if we go from being around quite a bit, being around for getting kids out the door, being around for supper time and bedtime, and all of a sudden, hey, it's fit to go. Neighbor's going to plant. I'm going to go plant. I'm going to spray. I'm going to do all this stuff, and we're just gone. It's that change that I feel like is actually really hard for us to adapt to and really hard for us to accept, even, right? And so the change is the one thing that I want to highlight there as to, and not saying that there's a lot we can do to avoid it. It's going to happen, but maybe just once again acknowledging that the change is coming. What can we do to be prepared for it, or what can we do to make the most of it? Okay. So as we get to kind of flipping this a little bit, talk about the realities, talking about a lot of these things. I know this is getting to be a longer episode, but there's so much here that a guy needs to unpack that I got so much more to say. So just hang with me here now. All right. So now we're going to get into the meat of this a little bit. What can you do as we start to flip this perspective, do our best to have a really positive impact on this family work-life balance? All right. So balance, I mentioned this earlier on, right? We always think of balance in our mind and what do we first picture? Well, maybe it's a scale. Maybe it's like an old time scale where you've got, stuff on this side, stuff on that side, and we want to keep it literally level, right? We want to keep this balance. So maybe we're spending, time here on the work life with the fam, and then on the work and the farm, but we're also spending time here with the family and the kids and the wife, and we're keeping it balanced, right? Well, we all know that is just not reality. That's just not true. So what I like to do is actually flip this a little bit and think of it differently. Instead of balance as in a scale, let's think of balance as in your checking account. Right? I just mentioned a checking account earlier on that other example on the change, but think of balance as your checking account. We're always trying to balance our checking account. You hear that all the time, balance your bank accounts, your checking accounts, your cash accounts, your savings account, all those things. Let's think of it that way. All right. So would you rather have a negative or positive checking account balance? Okay. You're probably thinking in your head, well, duh. I want to have a positive checking account balance. I want to have all the money in the world in that balance, in that checking account. Okay. Well, what about the work family life balance? What about your family checking account balance? All right. Maybe the balance with your kids and with your wife. Do you want to have a positive balance there at the end of the day, at the end of your life, right? Yeah, I think so. All right. So if we think of our relationships with those around us, whether it be our kids, our spouse, our parents even, think of those around us. If we want to maintain that positive checking account balance, if you will, well, first for starters, we got to put in a deposit. All right. We got to have money in there before we can take any sort of withdrawals, right? So we got to have money in that account. We got to spend some time with them. We got to put a deposit in there. We got to do things that are valuable to them to support that balance, to support those relationships, right? So we got to have that deposit first before we can make any sort of withdrawals. And then we're going to make the withdrawals because we always do. Maybe it's a something negative that happened to the relationship. Maybe it's missed ball game. Maybe it's a missed date night. Maybe it's a wasn't around for a week for bedtimes. But there's always going to be that withdrawal as it does as we get into the busy season. Especially, we're taking withdrawal after withdrawal with withdrawal. We're never actually making deposits, right? So the idea here with this is to maybe flip the mindset so that way if we know the busy season's coming up, if we know we're going to have some withdrawals coming out of that account, that balance, that family checking account balance, if you will, let's put some deposits in ahead of time. So that way it's still kind of this, somewhat positive balance there at the end of the day. And so, but then furthermore, life happens. Let's be real. Life happens. We do our best to maybe have this mindset, but the change is the hard part here. So we do our best to put some deposits in, but at the end of the day, shoot, bank account went negative. All right. We made too many withdrawals. And our bank account is negative. We got some red flags. We got some fees. We got some warnings here going on, and it's not good. We do not want any sort of our accounts to be negative, right? Well, what do we got to do? Well, we darn sure better make sure that we are putting some deposits back in. So maybe at the end of the day, that's putting some deposits back in. Maybe we realize, man, it's been a week since I've done any sort of deposits. I'm going to take off on a Saturday or a Sunday so we can spend some time with the kids and we can make sure that we can put some deposits back into this balance here, right? So that's ultimately kind of reframing that mindset, thinking through it in that light on when we talk about, kind of the work-life balance there, thinking through it as literally a checking account, making sure that we have more deposits than withdrawals, making sure that we're doing the best job that we can to keep that as positive as possible, right? So the last thing here before we get into as far as like what can you actually do is I feel like it's truly important to mention when it comes to working on the farm and everything that we're doing, all the work that we're putting in is we got to ask who or what are we actually doing all of this for? Okay. Because I think it's important worth noting as to what's this all for? What's your why behind everything? Why are you actually working so hard? Is it just to support your habit of working so hard? Is it just because that's the way you're taught, trained, and conditioned? Because if you don't work hard, you feel like a lazy POS? Is it because if you don't work hard, you don't think that you're actually worth anything? What is the reason that you're actually working all for? Because we think in the back of our mind, we're like, well, I'm doing all this to build a better life for our kids. Well, if we say this is all for our kids, but we won't do too much to actually build that life that they want to be a part of, they never might actually come back. Then what? Right? So we say this is all for our kids, but yet we don't do the things that are necessary to make it so that our kids actually want to be a part of this life. Then what's this actually all for? And then they never actually come back. Right? I really want to highlight that. Because we say this is all for our kids, better experiences for our kids, better life for our kids. We'll give them things that we never had, right? Is that truly what they need, though? Is that truly what you want in the long run? Because we see these different operations out there. I'm sure you can highlight some in your area to where they're just, let's face it, workaholics. And they do all of these things. They work all this they say, in quotations, it's for their kids, for their family, for a better lifestyle. But in reality, the results that gets us is kids that don't want to be around their father, don't want to be around this lifestyle because they see all the negatives of it, because they never got to be around their kids or their dad, right? And so that's something that I really want to highlight here, because this is truly important. We got to ask ourselves, were all those hours really worth it? Were all those missed bedtimes? Were all those missed mornings? Getting the kids cereal, getting their breakfast ready, getting their book bags, all that packed and out the door on time and off to the bus, were they really worth it? Were all the ball games that we missed, all the graduations that we missed, all the little things here and there that we missed really worth it? If they're not willing to be around us, if they're not wanting to come back to this life that we've built, that we care for so much, and that we've put all this blood, sweat, and tears into, is it really worth it? That's a hard question to answer. And so that's why we keep that in the back of our mind as our why, as to why we're doing all this, as to why it's okay to take off on a Sunday. It's okay to maybe shut down just a little bit early so that way we can go tuck the kids in bed at night. Now, I'm not saying that we have to do this every single night. This is to where it has to be kind of in alignment with the season that you're in. And this is where it gets really tough. And this is where I'm also going to mention back to the previous episodes. I really honing in on this, the difference between important versus urgent. Okay. So this is where we got to highlight this one more time, especially when it comes to everything that we're doing. We look at this holistically. We got the business, we got the family farm, if you will, right? Family, farm. Those two are put together. They're not separate. Okay. So we got to ask ourselves what's truly important versus what's truly urgent. Okay. Is it urgent to go plant the crop here tonight, or can it wait till tomorrow? Can I put the kids in bed? Can I spend some time with them? Can I have them ride along with me? Can I do this, that, or the other thing to keep that true goal of whatever we have? Okay. So that's what I wanted to highlight right before we get into, okay, what can we actually do here at the end of the day? Okay. So let's get into this. Let's spend just a little bit of time on this, not a lot, but I mentioned this earlier. I think the biggest thing that we can do, step number one, is just literally being aware. Okay. Being aware of your actions and how they affect those around you. We tend to really kind of ignore things or maybe don't even care to some extent. Back to that example of using work as an escape. Sorry, wife, I know it's 6:30, 7 o'clock and you got supper on the table and you got to get the kids to bed, but I'm going to go plant. Okay. Sorry. See you later. The farm, gotta go. See you. Bye. Good luck. See you later. Yeah. We just got to be mindful of our actions and how they actually affect those around us and just be aware of that. Because if we're not aware of how that can negatively affect those around us, if we don't even care, that's kind of the first sign that, maybe there's a deeper problem there. Right. And so I think that's just step number one, is just being aware, just as simple as that. You know, if we're doing those things, at least knowing, shit, this is just not a good idea. So maybe I did it tonight, but maybe we're not going to do it tomorrow night. Okay. Maybe we did it a couple nights in a row, but hey, we're not going to do it after that. Realizing that this is a problem, it's affecting those around us and it's not in a good way. Okay. So number one. Number two is going to be communicate. Just communicate as best as you can. And I say this because I'm guilty of it as well, is being honest and realistic with what our plans are. It's always the case where I'm like, well, I'm not going to tell her that I'm going to be working late because she's going to get upset. No, that's probably going to make things worse. All right. Or I'm going to tell her, well, I should be home in an hour, when in reality, we know that this is probably going to take 3 hours. Okay. So just being honest and being realistic with what our plans are, with what our day looks like. And hey, there's a lot of things that are out of our control. Things broke down. We had to do this, that, or the other thing. And that happens. Okay. But just communicate it as best as you can. And once again, being aware of how we communicate and how that's affecting those around us and our actions, right? So I think communication can actually be step number two there, in that just doing your best to communicate what your plans are, what your intentions are. Be like, hey, by the way, I know you really want me to go to the wedding on Saturday, but I just feel like I need to do this. I need to just get these things done. And I'm really sorry I'm not going to make it, or I'm not going to be there on time, or this is what my thoughts are. And don't tell her that 5 minutes before you're supposed to leave for the wedding. Tell her that way in advance. So that way we can actually let her know, maybe help her prepare, or just do our best to literally communicate what our plans are. All right. Number three here, this is one that I think it really depends on each different operation, each different context. But why can't we just mesh these two together to some extent? We talk at family farm, right? Family farm. And this just depends on your operation. But I'm thinking about ourselves, where it's me and my dad, and our kids we live on the farm, right? So we try to do our best to take the kids with us as much as we can in the planner, or if we're doing something else. Now, I will say the caveat to this is really hard, and this is a really tension point for my wife and I within our relationship, is the sprayer. Because with the sprayer, one, there's no buddy seat in there. There's a place for somebody to sit so they can ride along if they need to. But we just don't necessarily like our kids being around the sprayer. Our kids are licking windows all the time, it seems like, and just putting their nose up against stuff and touching stuff and eating stuff and all this other stuff, right? So being in the sprayer is not necessarily one of those places that we want them all the time. There's just too much stuff that we don't necessarily want them getting into. We don't necessarily want them being around the chemicals any more than what we have to. I don't necessarily even like being around that stuff, so we don't want them around that stuff either. So that's one of our tension points, because they can't necessarily go with me and go spend some time with me to get them out of the house, right? But back to meshing the two together, as much as we can, my dad and my dad's great about taking one of the kids with him or a couple of them with him to get them out of the house, give my wife a break for a little bit and just give her some time with maybe only one or two kids. It's a lot less to handle sometimes, right? And so that's why if we can just mesh those two together, maybe the kids just want to see you. Maybe your wife just wants to see you. Maybe they all come out and ride with you. I know that takes time. I know that kind of puts a dent into your schedule, your productivity, and all this other stuff. But why not just mesh the two together? You might find that that's actually going to help put a deposit into that work life balance, right? Into that bank account balance just by meshing the two together, just by taking some time, even though it might not get to all the acres that you want covered because of this. But why not just take the time? Yes, I know she's coming. She's 5 minutes late, but don't go to that end of the other end of the field because that's going to make her mad. She's got to sit at the end of the field and she's got to wait for you while three kids are screaming in the back, right? Do your best just to kind of be mindful to kind of mesh these two together. Family, farm, it's called that for a reason. So let's do our best to mesh those two together. All right. Kind of fourth one here is be mindful. We've said this all along. Be mindful of what's truly important versus what's just urgent. Okay, in this, I would say let's maybe do our best to try to come up with some non-negotiables. Okay, so tonight we've got our third kid, Rue. He's got his preschool graduation. Now, we are lucky because it did rain, and so not going to have to worry about the peer pressure being out in the fields. But for us, for me, that's a non-negotiable. All right, some of those little things like that are just non-negotiable. If we were in the field, I would have shut down, would have made sure that we were able to make it to that, so that way we can support them in that. And once again, be around them so that way they want to be around us. So, what are some non negotiables? But then, furthermore, build this out as a family. You and your wife are a team. Build this out together. Maybe you've got older kids. What are some things that they really want you at? What are some things that maybe they don't care if you're there or not, right? So, build this out as a family. So what are some non negotiables that you are going to be there? Maybe there's some things that it's not a big deal if you miss the parent teacher conference. It's not a big deal if you miss that or the other thing. But by golly, you better be here. Okay, so figure that out ahead of time and kind of create that plan. Fifth and last one as to what you can do. This is a big one here, guys. Allow yourself to quit. Allow yourself to quit because sometimes we have a hard time just actually being done when the work is done. And I've said that before, back to running off the adrenaline, back to just kind of using work as an escape and just doing this, that, or the other thing. Allow yourself to quit. And I say allow it because we have the ability, especially as business owners, as entrepreneurs, if you are the business owner, if you're not working for somebody else, in this case, we have the ability to shut down and create our own schedule. Allow yourself to do that. Allow yourself to quit to go to the preschool graduation, to go to the T-ball game, to go to this, that, or the other thing. Allow yourself to do that. Allow yourself to go to what's important and not take care of just solely what's always urgent. Okay? Allow yourself to quit. All right. Now, we're getting to the ending here. So hang with me because this is really going to tie this all together with these 3-part series here that we've talked about, right? So the workload is real, the business demands are real, and the pressure on your personal life is real. All right. But here's what all ties these three together. None of it gets better by accident. None of it changes by accident. The farmers who come out of planting season ahead, spring season, or the busyness season, or it's calving or harvest, the ones that come out ahead in those busy seasons in all three of these different areas didn't just get lucky. They got intentional. Okay. Intentional about where they spend their time. Intentional about keeping the business side alive even when the field is calling. Intentional about what they're protecting and why. They got intentional. And that's, by the way, folks, exactly what we do here at Pioneer Farmer and the operations that I work directly with. The big goal that we're trying to get here is to where we can think differently, farm intentionally, and lead boldly. All right, so if you've listened to all three of these episodes, and if you're nodding along as I've talked about different things, if the workload is heavy, if the business side is sliding, and the balance feels off, that's not a coincidence, folks. That's exactly who Pioneer Farmer is and why we built this, right? Why we're here to help other people. I coach farmers and ranchers one-on-one because I believe you deserve the same quality of thinking and planning that any successful business owner gets, right? Delivered by someone who is living the same seasons you are, that has the same conviction that you do to solve these problems. So if you want to talk about what this looks like for your operation, reach out to me. Send me a text, shoot me a DM, follow me on social media, whatever works best for you. Let's have a real conversation. And once again, I want to say thank you for being along for all these episodes, especially this one today. A lot of value in this one. And I'm grateful for you to stay with me here on this longer episode. The series came straight from what's happening on our operation and the things that I'm hearing from others across the Midwest and from those that we're working with directly. So you should know that you're not alone in this. So keep on going. All right, so go and be safe, folks. And I hope you found value in these 3 episodes that we put together for you. And we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram @GarrettRuskamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.